thanks a lot for having me, for offering this opportunity to speak about transformative education. And what I would like to do today is just post some ideas that I have on this concept of transformative education. And if you can give me a sign when I'm almost done, that would be very helpful, Thijs, because I don't have a clock here. What I want to do is talk about transformative education from different perspectives, starting with the individual, with the student perspective, and then go to the teacher-student perspective, and finally to education society perspective, because I think these three levels are required to speak of transformative education. And most of transformative education starts with the individual. That's also where you can find the kind of founding father, measure of transformative education, in an article he wrote in 1979. And what he thinks about transformative education is that you question yourself. So you enter your education with the beliefs you have from your childhood. And then when you grow up, you start to question these forms of knowledge you have. And that's what he thinks is transformative education. I think this is a good basis to start with, but I think it also needs some specification. What do we, and especially if we translate it to education, and Meserov does that in his way, and I will do that as a trained philosopher in my way. And to do that, I use the work of Geert Biesta. He's a professor in educational philosophy, and he says that education is about three things: qualification, socialization, and subjectification. And qualification is that you learn the methods of specific knowledge fields. So the methods of sociology, of economics, etc. That's, of course, what we all learn in our educational programs. Socialization means that you become familiar with the paradigm you're working in. So I think that also rings a bell for all of us. We're very familiar with the paradigms we work from. Subjectification, that for me is where the transformation starts, really, because then you are positioning yourself, you're being critical, you're being affirmative, but you're very aware of that towards the ideas you have. That's where you, as a student or as a teacher, are positioning yourself. And for me, that on a student level is the basis of transformative education. It's also something that I sometimes as a student missed, and I think a couple of our students do that, because you can sometimes be indifferent towards what you learn, and you just go to the lectures and then you go back, and whether or not you change that, that's not a question for you. But I think when talking about transformative education, we should challenge our students to ask this question and to answer this question. So that's where transformative education starts for me. What I especially like about the concept of transformative education here, and that's also what you see in the work of Biesta, is that it's not only future-oriented. You start with a history, you start with a form, and you change the form. And it's this continuous interaction between what you have and how you're going to change it. So you don't treat a student as a tabula rasa that comes in. Every student is different. Every student brings a different background. That's also important for transformative education. Then going from the individual student perspective towards the student-teacher relationship. And I especially do this because I think that we transform the students almost always, but I'm looking for a specific form of transformation. And I think the first step of transformation is that you bring the students the joy of a specific discipline, of a paradigm. I think that's the transformation that we're all very familiar with. You have these teachers speaking in front of you, and you go out of the lecture as a different person. You look at the world in a different way. This form of transformative education was already there in the past. These are these brilliant, excellent lecturers that we have. They also changed the student in a way, because they change what the student wants. And that's for me an important concept. So we often talk about student-centered education, asking the student what he wants. And I think from the perspective of transformative education, that's the wrong question. Because what a student wants should change during his education. So if a student gives the same answer at the beginning of his education and at the end of the education, nothing has happened. No transformation took place. And these lecturers can contribute to that. But of course, I want to go one step further. I think within the student-teacher relationship, the transformative character does not only go for the student, it also goes for the teacher. How do you change as a teacher during your career? And when do you make a difference? But the first thing first, how do you change as a teacher? I think every one of us who has ever taught a course experienced a change in the beginning, because you learn the field and you learn how to explain it to students. That's an important step. But after a couple of years, you have no change anymore. You don't transform anymore, because you know beforehand which questions will be asked by which students. And I think to change that, in the teacher-student relationship, it's important that you learn from your students as well. Not only what do you bring to the classroom, but what do they bring to the classroom. And a way to do that, for example, is to position you as a teacher, not only as one who brings knowledge, also definitely not as one who facilitates the student, but as a co-researcher. That's why the research that I develop now in the minor is research where the teachers act as a co-researcher, meaning that they also don't know what will come out of the course. That's one important thing in the student-teacher relationship. The other thing is related to the former point, is what difference do you make as a teacher? I was triggered to answer this question by an interview that I had a couple of years ago. And then the interviewer asked me, what's for you the ideal student? And I was talking about someone who's curious, hardworking, engaged, blah, blah, blah. You all can imagine this. And then the interviewer said, I think very rightly to me, okay, that's very easy for you. You don't have to do a thing. And in a way, he was right, because if we all get these brilliant, hardworking students, what's our role? So I think as teachers, we should look much more on how we can change the students. Spoken in Dutch, how do you transform a dubbeltje into a kwartje? And that's something completely different. So now we judge on the end results, and I think we should judge much more, if you have transformative education, on how do the students start and how do they finish their studies. Here, this is related to my former point, teacher transformation. Organize your education as research, not only telling the students what the research is you've done and how you've done it, but take them with you, also in the bachelor already, because they're able to do that, take them with you on the research trip and let them take you with them. And I think then there also comes room from the different backgrounds of the students, because each student has a different background and brings something into class. And I experience this very much when I teach with art class students, for example. That's what I do in the Rotterdam Arts and Sciences Lab. There we combine arts with sciences, and then you become very well aware of the fact that students bring in their own knowledge. But it's not only discipline related, it's also related to the background students have. They will also bring in their own knowledge. Students from a different socio-economic background bring in different things, and see how you can value that as a teacher when developing your education. Finally, and I think that's where most of you think about when talking about transformative education, how can academics transform society? And how can you help students with doing that? And here I don't think about education where you're asked to solve problems, because when you're asked to solve problems, the question is already given. While I think that as students and as academics, we can contribute to changing the question and to find out what it is that we want to discuss. How do I do that? How do I envision that? I give some examples. First of all, I think what we have to learn our students is that a seat at the table is very important if you want to make a transformation. And that's something that we not always realize. So for example, when I'm teaching at the philosophy department, nobody will question why I teach philosophy. That's self-evident. When I was teaching at the economics department, nobody questioned why I was teaching economics. Of course, you see now continuously that students question why we are teaching the economics of philosophy that we're teaching related to debates on decolonization. But my point is also different. As soon as we walk out this domain, Woudestein, for example, then our knowledge is questioned. Then neither economic knowledge, neither philosophical knowledge, and also not medical knowledge is self-evident. So if we want to make a change, and I think my colleague Marlie Heyer did that in a debate on Corona, that's why I put her here, then you have to make clear what kind of knowledge you have to bring to the table. What do you have to add? And that's a question that is not asked within a discipline. So a first step of transformation, if you want to realize that, is that you can show others what you have to bring to the table. Why are you here? Why should they speak to you? Why should they take this path and not another one? The other thing is that we have to realize that if we want to transform something, that more is needed than cognitive knowledge. We're very good at thinking. But here also working with art students, I realized that that has its severe limits. We're good at putting things in words. And I often have these meetings and then they rightfully tell me, you're talking again. That's the only way we can communicate. And that's helpful, that contains a lot of knowledge, but it's also extremely limited. So if we want to make changes in society, we at least have to realize that our cognitive abilities are valuable, but also very limited. Another thing that I think is important, that's specifically related to these two students, is that it's not only up to us to define which challenges we should put on the agenda, but also ask the students themselves. They are the ones who should be able to define the future challenges, to tell with what challenges they want to engage. So the other important point of this transformative education is that it's multisensory. The other thing is that if you want to make a transformation, you should not focus only on the individual. That's also something that we do at the universities. We assess students as individuals. As an individual, you will never make a major change. You always need a team around you. And of course, we sometimes put students in teams and then we give them an assignment and we see them back a couple of weeks later. But investing in how team dynamics go, how you can learn from each other, how you can address issues, how you can listen to each other, is crucial for transformative education. It also links to enlarging your team. When doing transformative education, you should realize that academic knowledge is not the only way of knowledge. You should try to get on an equal footing with other partners who also have societal knowledge, personal knowledge, whatever. How do we communicate with them? And how can we make sure that we not only have this academic reflex and judging these knowledge are based on the methodologies that we use. So, so this kind of knowledge doesn't fit my methodology, so it will not be right, or I can't take it into account. It means that you're continuously working with a variety of knowledges. How can we help our students doing that? Finally, and that's also related to the point of the individual, I think that as human beings, we can make a difference. We can take responsibility for certain topics. But when we are transformative, we should look beyond what we as individuals do. Not only in teamwork, because a team is most of the times made up of a number of individuals, but also, and this is amongst others based on the ideas of the philosopher Donna Haraway, also look at the environment you're working with. What does technology do? How do we interact with technology? What's the responsibility there? How do we interact with the environment? What's the responsibility there? How do we give the environment or technology a seat at the table that I mentioned before? And I think these are also topics that pop up related to, for example, the technology topic came up related to the financial crisis. We developed this technology and then it went its own way. And what should financial economics do about it? How do they relate towards that? And of course, the environment pops up when we're talking about climate crisis and all kinds of related issues. So I think to wrap up my presentation, I think when talking about transformative education, we need to think that through on different kind of levels. As an individual, looking at the individual student, how do you make sure that the individual student transforms when he gets into university? Not only judging whether it becomes a 7 or an 8, but what's the difference you make? Because that's where the contribution of education is situated. The next level is, how do you transform as a teacher yourself? What do you learn? Which parties do you listen to? And how do you position yourself as a co-researcher next to students, being part of the team? And finally, related to the environment, because I think that's also where the focus of Impact at the Core is. How do you get a seat at the table? How can you make your knowledge, the value of your knowledge, clear towards others? And how can you collaborate with these different kinds of knowledge? Because that's the point where you can reframe the discussion, put different problems, put different issues on the table before you start to discuss that. That was my presentation. I don't see any signs from Thijs, so I think that I'm perfectly in time.